racing to the Breeders' Cup, presented by Buick. Well, Breeders' Cup Day is this Saturday, October 26th, and we're ready to give you a preview of this great afternoon of horse racing. Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Johnson.
And I'm Charlsie Cantey. Since 1984, horses have come from around the world for the single ultimate day of thoroughbred racing. 7 events with purses totaling $11 million. It's the Super Bowl, it's the World Series, it's the Academy Awards, and it's all the brainchild of one man.
And that was John Gaines, the creator of the Breeders' Cup, which in year number 13 is truly a showcase for the world's best. And it's being held for the first time outside of the United States, and for the first time, the finale of the card, the Breeders' Cup Classic, is worth $4 million.
A purse worthy of our defending champion cigar. America's Horse is attempting to become the first back-to-back winner of the Breeders' Cup Classic.
And we hope that as we look at the pre-entries for the Breeders' Cup card, we can all get just a little closer to the winner's circle and the cashier's window.
And we hope our insights will help you narrow your selections, as the Woodbine surface can be a little tricky.
And so can the weather. And to give us that story, let's go to our broadcast partners, Tom Durkin and Mike Battaglia. They're standing by at Woodbine Racecourse in Canada. Hey, how's the weather up there, guys?
Just kidding. The weather is fine here. And forget those stereotypes you know about Canada, you know, about people running around in fur pelts and mucklucks and saying, "Hey, old hoser, how's she going?" It's really not like that.
What's a muckluck, eh?
I don't know, but I don't think I've seen anybody in Toronto wearing mucklucks, whatever they may be. Toronto's a very cosmopolitan, very international kind of city.
You know, but the weather could play a factor, and it could benefit the Europeans. Historically, when the European runners have come into the warmer climates of California or Florida, they've run poorly. When they come into the cooler climates, they've already got their winter coats. They tend to run a lot better, and I think that's going to be the case this year.
And medication is a little different here.
No butte at all. The Lasix, very limited Lasix, similar to the rules in New York. Again, I think that could favor the European runners.
And favoring European runners, how about this magnificent European-style turf course here at Woodbine?
It is a magnificent course. The wide, sweeping turns, the long stretch, 1,440 feet from the top of the stretch home. So, again, like you say, that could favor the European runners. 3 things right off the top of the bat there that could favor those Europeans.
Well, it could have a little European flair, this Breeders' Cup 13. All things looking good for Breeders' Cup in Canada.
Hey?
Eh?
And we are happy to report that racing's answer to the McKenzie brothers will be back to preview all of the exciting contests scheduled for Breeders' Cup Day.
And we'll try to bring you up to speed on many of the top contenders headed to Toronto for Breeders' Cup 13.
The one that stands out probably, I think, was the most exciting was when Is It True, believe it or not, a horse a lot of people don't even remember, beat Easy Goer. I thought that was the upset of the 20th century.
Is It True? Trying to hold on. Easy Goer can't get to him. It Is It True who goes on to win it by a length.
Wayne Lukas has several winning memories from Breeders' Cup days. Most of those were with youngsters.
Wayne Lukas is the most successful Breeders' Cup trainer with 12 wins. He's won the Juvenile 4 times, the Juvenile Fillies 3 times, and in one of those he finished 1, 2, 3.
And as we look at the juvenile conditions, a few thoughts about this level of competition with 2-year-olds. First of all, you have to realize that 2-year-olds come to the Breeders' Cup with the least number of past performances. I mean, most of these freshmen have only been competing since July or August.
The Breeders' Cup is all about pedigree, and in both the juvenile races, we begin asking these well-bred babies to demonstrate their stamina as well by racing around 2 turns.
Now, remember last year at Belmont? The juvenile races were around 1 turn, so it's a little tougher this year.
So let's take a look at the pre-entries for the very first of this year's Breeders' Cup races. 12 fillies have been signed up for a wide-open race that will probably determine the year's 2-year-old champion filly. Maybe some of these fillies might not be household names yet, but their trainers certainly are. Nick Zito has Storm Song and Love That Jazz. Wayne Lukas has Sharp Cat and City Band. And while they're not the only horses running the race, they are the top contenders. Storm Song is Nick Zito's top gun. A 4-length victory over Sharp Cat in the Frizette 2 weeks ago established her as the division's leader. But Zito said don't discount Love That Jazz. She scored big in the Kentucky Cup Juvenile Fillies at Turfway Park. Both horses will run at Woodbine and may offer Zito his best shot at a Breeders' Cup trophy.
We'll be really strong in the filly race. I think Love That Jazz is a quality filly, too. I think a lot of people don't realize how good she is. You know, she won that race down in Turfway, and she won rather easy, too. So she's a quality filly. Of course, the Dogwood filly, you know, Storm Song, is really quality. You know, it was obvious in the Frizette what she did and how easily she won. So I think we're going to be well represented with the 2-year-old fillies.
Wayne Lucas, meantime, feels he'll be equally as strong. Prior to Sharp Cat's second-place finish in the Frizette, she won the Matron at a mile and the 7-furlong Del Mar Debutante. She'll be Lucas's top choice in the juvenile fillies race.
She had beaten Storm Song quite decisively in the race before the Matron, then came back in the Frizette, and Jerry let our filly run out there in 109. It was very quick. To put that in perspective, Serena Song went 10-2 the same day. So I think with a 2-turn race, which it would be at Woodbine in the Breeders' Cup, that we'll be able to relax a little bit more, and I think we can correct that, and I hope we can turn the tables.
Now, let's go back to the 2 guys who've been watching and calling most of these runners this fall. Mike, Tom?
Well, we talked about how long the stretch was on the turf course. On the main track, it's only 975 feet, pretty abbreviated. And this juvenile filly race is a race that has been dominated by closers. How's the layout of the track going to have to do with the outcome?
I think it's going to affect it a lot. It definitely favors the early runners. Early runners do very well here at Woodbine. That short stretch makes it tough for the horses to come from behind, but I think this is going to be a very tough race.
It could be a tale of 2 trainers, Wayne Lucas and Nick Zito, who have a great rivalry going in the Triple Crown, but in the Breeders' Cup, Wayne Lucas, a terrific record. He's won this race 3 times. Nick Zito, nothing yet.
Well, and Wayne Lucas has a couple of speedballs. He has Sharp Cat, who's running very well right now. He also has City Band. They both like to go to the front. Zito counters with Love That Jazz, a horse with plenty of tactical speed, and Storm Song, who I really liked her race in the Frizette last time out, and I definitely think that Zito has the hand to beat.
Yeah, those horses will be favorites, but there's a long shot alert. Long shot alert. Mike and I both like one at a price.
We do, Tom, and that's Minister's Melody, the horse that ran second to Love That Jazz in the Kentucky Cup at Turfway. She came from off the pace on a very speed-favoring track. If she draws a good post, she could be very dangerous.
All right, well, 2 guys here are going to be rooting for a horse with a price in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies.
The average payoff in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies is $14.40, and the favorite has won 5 times out of 12. Charlsie, who'll be favored this year?
I think probably Storm Song, off the basis of her closing finish in the Frizette. She just seems to be getting better the further she goes.
Well, one of the most impressive 2-year-old performances this year was out on the West Coast, where Lucas trainee City Band won the Oakleaf with such authority that many think she's as fast as the top 2-year-old colts.
But she runs on the lead, and only 2 fillies have ever gone wire to wire in the juvenile fillies. Even though Woodbine is speed favoring, Storm Song still looks to be closing in the stretch and catching the front runners like she did in the Frizette.
Now, throughout our program, we're going to have some obscure Breeders' Cup facts and trivia questions for you. The first one, well, everyone should know the largest win payoff in Breeders' Cup history. But who was responsible for the smallest win payoff on a $2 ticket? We'll be back with those answers after this timeout. This Breeders' Cup win payoff? Well, who could forget the 1993 Breeders' Cup Classic when our Kong stormed home and paid $269.20 to win. And on the other side of the coin, in a 13-horse field, Meadow Star won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies by 5 and paid only $2.40. And Charlsie, those races were on fast tracks. A lot of folks are concerned about the weather coming up this Saturday in the north.
Well, anytime at this time of year you were talking about the weather on the East Coast, it's purely speculative. But I'd say we're even money to be cool, to be breezy. We might get some showers depending on how these fronts move around.
Well, turning our attention to the juvenile, it's fun to look back at the results in this division and see that it was a coming-out party for horses who became major stars as they grew older. This year's Belmont winner, Editor's Note, was 3rd last year in the juvenile. Timber Country and Eltish were 1-2 in '94, and champion 3-year-old Tabasco Cat at 33-1 was third the year before he got that honor.
But there's a catch, and it's called the Breeders' Cup Jinx. In 12 runnings, not one Breeders' Cup juvenile winner has ever captured the Kentucky Derby, although 2 Kentucky Derby winners were beaten as 2-year-olds in the juvenile, Sea Hero and Ali Sheba.
Taking up the challenge this year will be a talented field from across the United States, Canada, and Europe. And year-end honors will also likely be at stake in this race. This list of a dozen young runners is, well, there's a lot of potential here, but there's also a lot of question marks. The only thing we know for sure in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile is that Futurity winner Traitor won't be running. Trainer Mary Epler has decided it's time to rest. So who is the favorite in this race? Well, 2 weeks ago, it was Ordway. Trainer David Donk bypassed the Futurity to get his horse ready for the Champagne. His decision paid off with a hard-fought victory that made Ordway the division leader.
You know, he showed what he was made of the other day. They run a 100 buyer number. I think there's a lot more fuel left in the tank, and you know, we're only looking to probably run him once more this year, and you know, look for a campaign next year. But I guess he's got a pretty good shot.
Ordway's position as the division frontrunner lasted less than a week. Enter Boston Harbor, trained by Wayne Lucas and ridden by Jerry Bailey. Boston Harbor ran to victory in Keeneland's Breeders' Futurity by half a length over Blazing Sword. A $1 million bonus and frontrunner status earned in the process.
I was pleased with the race. Obviously, the $1 million means a lot, and I thought he ran well. It was back, the thing that was significant about it, it was back very quick from the Kentucky Cup, and now we're going to have to come back again. That's going to test this little horse, but I was very pleased with the race.
And when you talk about Wayne Lucas, can Nick Zito be far behind? Like Lucas, Zito has more than one juvenile contender in Acceptable and Chamois Davis, but only Acceptable will make the trip to Woodbine.
He has run around 2 turns. He will definitely run a distance of ground. That is a big edge. He did win at Woodbine, and he ran a good race in the Champagne. He had difficulty in the race, so at this point, I would like to go with Acceptable.
Well, Nick Zito has been very effective in the Triple Crown, but he has never won a Breeders' Cup race. He's 0 for 11, but he's due. And to assess his chances and all the juvenile colts, we go back across the border to our American exiles in Canada, Tom and Mike.
The Breeders' Cup Juvenile is frequently a showdown between the best of the West against the best of the East. And this year, the West, pretty weak.
I have to agree with you. I'm not crazy about anything from the West Coast. I think it could come down to the best of the East against the best of the Midwest.
And you're from the Midwest? Give us the lowdown.
Well, Boston Harbor has just been fantastic. He's by far the dominant 2-year-old. He won the $1 million bonus for sweeping all 4 races in Kentucky. He has a lot of speed, although Lucas and Donna Barton have both said they think this horse can be rated. Jerry Bailey rode him last time out at Keeneland, and the horse was actually headed in the stretch and came back again to win, so he's going to take a lot of beating here, especially with this short stretch.
Yeah, well, I live in Long Island, and I can tell you the best horse on Long Island this year and in the eastern region is Ordway, who impressed me very favorably. How about you?
I agree. The Champagne was a huge race. David Donk had this horse just in top form. He's peaking at the right time. You like to see a horse moving forward. He'll be running at the end. Definitely the one to beat.
Let's not be too provincial. There is a hometown favorite here with the home court advantage. Cash Deposit.
Cash Deposit ran a huge race last time out in the Gray Breeders' Cup. He drew off. He won that race by 6 lengths. He's won 3 races over the track here at Woodbine, so he's the hometown favorite. He's got that home court advantage.
And there are no Arazis from Europe this year. In fact, there is no real standout in the 2-year-old colts.
There is a European in this field, Brave Act, who's won 3 of 4 starts and has already carried weight packages of 123 pounds all the way up to 131 pounds. And Charlsie, there's even a couple of maidens in here.
But they're accomplished maidens, Dave. Gold Tribute was 2nd in the Del Mar Futurity and 3rd in the Moet Champagne, while Michelle's All Hands was beaten only a neck in the Florida Stallion Stakes at Calder, and Calder youngsters have traditionally done well in the juvenile.
Well, let's turn to the human side of the Breeders' Cup and jockey Chris McCarron, one of the most successful jockeys in Breeders' Cup history, with 6 trips to the winner's circle, including Ali Sheba, Passiana, and Sunday Silence, and this one.
I can't remember ever getting more nervous riding a horse than I did riding Precisionist, because I always felt like, because he was so brilliant and so fast, the only way he could get beat is if I got in his way. So I always got pretty nervous riding him.
Smile, Mount Livermore, Precisionist surging. Smile, a short blade. Precisionist down the outside. Mount Livermore toward the rail. What a finish. Here comes Precisionist to snatch the victory in the final strides.
A couple of notes about My Flag. She's the daughter of a Breeders' Cup champion, personal ensign. My Flag won the juvenile fillies at Belmont Park. And if she wins the Distaff Saturday, she'll be the first to win Breeders' Cup races in 2 different divisions.
Where do we get all these facts and figures, you ask? Well, all it takes is one trip down the information superhighway.
The Breeders' Cup website is located on the World Wide Web at www.breederscup.com, and it contains a wealth of knowledge for anyone interested in Breeders' Cup's past or present. Right now, you can find out which horses are pre-entered for this year's championship, or find out where your seats are located through this handy diagram of the grandstand. And there's also a map of the immediate area surrounding the racetrack, as well as information about Toronto and its hotels, restaurants, and even the transportation systems. There's also an extensive library of Breeders' Cup facts from past championships, including profiles on winning owners, breeders, trainers, jockeys, and of course, the thoroughbreds themselves. After the break, we'll catch up with the fastest of the fast, the sprinters, here on Racing to the Breeders' Cup. One horse in the pick 7. There's only been 2 winning favorites in 12 years, and only 5 favorites have been in the money. This is a real scramble.
The gate is always full for the sprint. The average field is usually 13 runners going only 6 furlongs with a heavy emphasis on speed. Naturally, it's frantic from the get-go, resulting in tight photo finishes in 6 of the last 7 years.
It's a pretty standard layout for the sprint at Woodbine. 1 turn on the main track. And on this list of pre-entered sprinters, note one appealing skier, especially if the track comes up sloppy. He set a track record at Turfway Park on a very wet surface on Kentucky Cup Day at 6 furlongs.
But the sprint is run at Woodbine, where competing in your own backyard is most advantageous. Hometown favorite Lang Fur may be the first to walk off with a Breeders' Cup trophy next Saturday. After all, he's already won over the Woodbine surface, and his victory in the Vosburg over Honor and Glory make him a serious contender. This year's Breeders' Cup sprint at Woodbine is shaping up to be another showcase for D. Wayne Lucas, who could saddle as many as 11 horses. 2 of his solid contenders should figure in the sprint. Honor and Glory won the Met Mile on Memorial Day. Since then, he was second in the Vosburg. And 2 weeks ago in the Boojum, he was the beaten favorite to stablemate Lord Carson. Lord Carson led all the way that day, paid $19.80, and has his trainers singing his praises.
We haven't had that strong a hand since Gulch won it, you know, back in '88. But I like both of them. They're very, very good horses. They'll get into the race. I think Lord Carson...
Recognized that I probably ran him back too soon at Del Mar, and So we opted to pass the ancient title and just go straight into the Breeders' Cup.
I feel this time if I go with this horse, I'll feel very comfortable that he's very competitive. I know we got a lot of nice horses to run against. I think maybe this horse is right now might be able to place himself better than a lot of horses because he can either do the lead thing or come from off of it.
The Breeders' Cup Sprint is a race where you really need an edge, an angle. So let's return to Canada and get one from Tom and Mike.
No such thing as the gender gap when it comes to the Breeders' Cup Sprint. If the photos had gone the right way, fillies would have won this race 7 times.
Well, they've won it 3 times, including last year with Desert Stormer, and this year we've got a couple of quality ones, Capote Bell and Chiposa Springs. I think both of these horses have legitimate chances to win the sprint.
The main track isn't a track that necessarily lends itself to a stretch runner here at Woodbine, and neither does the Breeders' Cup Sprint.
No, historically you have to be close to the lead. There's been a couple to come from far off of it, but here at Woodbine, I think tactical speed is a must, and I think the post position draw is going to be very important. The 2 real speed horses, Lord Carson and Appealing Skier, if one of those horses, say, draws the rail and the other one draws the outside, that horse on the rail is going to be awfully tough to catch.
There's a horse that runs powerfully in the middle part of his races, Langfuhr.
He does do that, and he loves this track. He's run here 11 times, 5 wins, 4 seconds, but he's never won at 6 furlongs. He's more of a 7 furlong horse, and historically, you need a race at 6 furlongs before you can win the Breeders' Cup Sprint.
Well, lots of angles here in this race, so bet your convictions. Unless, of course, you're a male chauvinist, then I'd pass this race.
Well, if you are a chauvinist, you're going to miss a wonderful opportunity on a very capable pair of fillies here in the sprint with Chiposa Springs and Capote Bell. The 3-year-old filly, Capote Bell, is just possessed of unreal speed. Here she is in the test stakes at Saratoga. She's been a half a mile in 43-1. She runs 3/4 of a mile in 107-4 en route to her 7 furlong victory. She came back and ran against older fillies, running with Chiposa Springs and the Ballerina, finishing second. She ran with the boys in the Kentucky Cup and was a good second to Appealing Skier. So she's pretty awesome. Watch her run.
Tom and Mike alluded to how well fillies and mares have done in the sprint. They've actually won it 3 times. Safely kept, very subtle, and last year, Desert Stormer took the sprint. Hey, here's another Breeders' Cup trivia question. Earlier, we saw Precisionist win the sprint after losing the Classic. Hey, now tell us, who won the Classic after losing the sprint? Well, how did you do on our trivia question? You know which Breeders' Cup champion won the Classic following a loss in the sprint? It was Black Tie Affair, winning the Classic in 1991 after finishing 3rd at 6 furlongs in 1990. That was a tough one. Next up, the Breeders' Cup Distaff. And this is a race where you can look for
Time supplement herself and a 2-time Breeders' Cup champ.
Now, the yellow triangle next to another heavyweight in this field, Yanks Music, means that she's also been cross-entered in the $4 million Classic. And Charlsie, if Yanks Music would run 3rd in the Classic, she'd make as much money as she would if she'd won the Distaff.
Well, My Flag's another 3-year-old filly here in the Distaff, and they get a 3-pound break in the weights. One reason why 3-year-old fillies have fared so well in the Distaff, winning 3 times. And Yanks Music is a very sharp sophomore, ready to add her name to the list next week. Yanks Music arrived in Canada riding high on a 3-race winning streak. Grade 1 scores in the Alabama at Saratoga, the Ruffian at Belmont Park, and most recently a victory over Serena Song and My Flag in the Beldame. Leo O'Brien always knew he had a good horse, but said Yanks Music really blossomed at the spot.
She seemed to do smashing when she went to Saratoga, like the
to imagine one that would try harder day in and day out against Colts, fillies, everybody's racetrack, different distances. I mean, she really typifies what we're talking about when we say a champion. She is really a champion.
With my flag, she's probably going to have to do a little improvement to be able to beat those horses, and maybe in the next 3 weeks she will improve, and maybe when we get to Woodbine going around 2 turns and a little bit faster pace, maybe can play into our favor a little better.
For a different spin on the distaff, how about Spinster Champ Different? The Argentine import is 4 for 4 on the dirt in the U.S., and like Bayacoa and Paciana before her, she'll be supplemented to run in the Breeders' Cup.
The only way she's going to win an Eclipse Award is if she goes and beats the best, and it's the only way we're going to do it.
And if you're going to do it correctly at the betting windows, you have to study up. Right, Tom Durkin?
Well, Mike, I have done some thorough and exhaustive of her last 10 starts, and she'll be a pretty good price.
I would think she'd be 3 or 4 to 1, and her speed's going to make her very dangerous, very tough to catch.
You look into the history of this race, and you got to come up with the name Ron McAnally.
Right, and he's got Different in here. She's undefeated in this country. It reminds me of Paciana and Bayacoa. He brought her over from Argentina. He's using the Spinster as her final prep, and she just keeps getting better.
Ron McAnally coming to this race with Different. He's won it 3 times with mares from Argentina that they had to supplement. Got to give him a lot of consideration in this year's distaff. And by the way, I wouldn't bet on any Colts or Geldings either.
I would be very careful about letting Tom Durkin change any of your money into Canadian dollars. But it really is special when a true star, a war horse like Serena's Song, comes back to competition in such a big race.
Whatever kind of race it is, I love to watch her run. Her sheer determination is just incredible. She's the yardstick by which we measure all the other race of this Breeders' Cup.
Well, next we'll turn our attention to the first grass race of the afternoon. And here's a turf racing trivia question sent to us through the internet by Victoria Keith. Which Breeders' Cup winner was the first to be sired by a Breeders' Cup champion? The answer after this break. Before the break, we asked, who was the first Breeders' Cup winner to be sired by a Breeders' Cup champion? The answer? Tikkanen, the 1994 Breeders' Cup turf champ, whose daddy was the great Cozine, winner of the 1985 Breeders' Cup Mile at Aqueduct. Now, the first turf encounter on Breeders' Cup Day is a 1-mile, 1-turn grass race with a $1 million purse at stake. And it turns out to be a world summit. Mark of Esteem, the best miler in Europe, travels to Toronto to take on America's, Canada's, and Japan's best milers.
And this 1-turn mile might help alleviate some of the traffic problems that have plagued previous runnings of the Breeders' Cup Mile. After a long 4-furlong run down the backstretch, the course begins a gradual 15-foot drop around the 2-furlong turn before emptying into that wide, long stretch.
3-year-olds have won the mile 5 times. Fillies have won the race 4 times. The average winner has paid 8 to 1.
And this year's mile's oversubscribed with 17 horses, and the yellow triangles indicate those who are cross-entered in other Breeders' Cup races. Dave mentioned how well 3-year-olds and fillies have done here, and we've got plenty of both this year. 5 fillies and 4 3-year-olds.
Now, the first question that handicappers will ask when they attack this race is, where is this horse from?
The European horses have always seemed to run well in Canada, and I think with the weather, with the softer turf, from where they're coming from, I think that they will probably have an advantage.
Shug McGahee's opinion of the European invaders is the same held by most American trainers. Stop the Europeans, and you have a good chance to win the Breeders' Cup Mile. Leading the list of American challengers is Prestonwood Farms' DeHaas. The versatile 4-year-old finished second in the Kelso, and jockey Gary Stevens promises that the best is still to come.
I don't think we saw the best of DeHaas the other day. He did run a great race, made the lead very late in the race, and the winner just flew up on the outside, and DeHaas really didn't even see him before it was too late. So I'm looking for a big run from him on Breeders' Cup Day also.
If DeHaas doesn't win the mile, maybe Urgent Request will. Charlie Whittingham's horse set a new course record in winning the Oak Tree Mile at Santa Anita. Urgent Request's biggest problem is consistency. And Urgent Request isn't the only record setter in the field. Jim Toner's Memories of Silver won Keeneland's QE2, setting a new course record in the process. A 4-for-4 record on the turf makes her a possibility.
I think I have an exceptional filly, an exceptional horse. So if ever the opportunity was to come up to do something like this, I think this would be the time to do it, because I think she's an above average horse. And that would be the only reason I would be attempt to do something like this.
And Richard Mandela may start a horse in the Breeders' Cup Mile. Atticus won the Grade 3 Kentucky Cup Classic at Turfway. That win on the dirt has Mandela on the fence.
His last race was awesome. He ran 3/4 and 8 and change and still kept going. You know, like I say, I've run him twice on the dirt, and he's won both of them, and he beat a nice field of horses in Kentucky. And maybe that's what he wants to do. We're going to play with both sides and see which way to go.
Regardless of where Dick Mandela and Atticus are headed, right now we're headed north to Canada for some more insight from Tom and Mike.
Well, they're putting the finishing touches on the magnificent turf course here at Woodbine, a turf course that the Europeans should like. And Mike, this was a race that from the very beginning was designed to attract horses from Europe to run in the Breeders' Cup. There isn't even a 1-mile turf race in America that's a Grade 1.
No, and the Europeans have run very well in the past. They've won 6 out of the 12 runnings, and while there's no clear-cut favorite this year, I think the Europeans again are going to be very strong.
The Europeans have won 6 of the 12, and the Americans have won the other 6 of the 12, and we're well represented this year as well.
I think so too. I think the Kelso was a very strong race again this year. Same Old Wish is really coming on strong toward the end of the year. DeHaas coming out of that same race. They both overcame like horrendous trips in the Kelso, and both ran very well. If you want to look at a horse from the West Coast, Charlie Whittingham's got one called Urgent Request. He's very erratic, but last time out, he ran the mile in 1:32.2. That's only a 5th off the world record.
Well, don't forget, when you're handicapping the Breeders' Cup Mile, the stretch here at Woodbine is well over a 1/4 mile long. That's a lot longer than any American horse has looked at in their careers.
Let's zero in on the 2 big European raiders here. Mark of Esteem, who won the Queen Elizabeth II at Ascot, ridden that day by young jockey Frankie Dettori, who won all 7 races at Ascot that afternoon. Dettori will join Mark of Esteem at Woodbine. Remember, it was Frankie who won this race 2 years ago aboard Barathea. But in France, there's a race that really sets up well for the Breeders' Cup Mile. It's the Prix du Moulin at Longchamp, and it's been won by both Miesque and Ridgewood Pearl on their way to Breeders' Cup victories. This year's Prix du Moulin winner was Ashkelani. He will not make the trip to Canada. But the second-place finisher, Spinning World, will attend Breeders' Cup 13 off this length-and-a-half loss to the highly regarded winner.
The Europeans sound pretty imposing, but the Americans will be no pushovers. And there are plenty of Americans in this field, and they're tough. Just watch the finish of the 1-mile Kelso from Breeders' Cup Preview Day at Belmont, and you'll see what kind of finishing kick you can expect. DeHaas looks like a sure winner here when Shane Sellers aboard Same Old Wish finds some room and knifes through from 5th to 1st. The 3rd-place finisher, Volan Sheen, will also make the trip to Woodbine. That's one of the turf races you'll see at Breeders' Cup 13. After this break, we'll take a look at the other one. Sudsky, second in the arc. 3 entries from Sheikh Mohammed's extensive stable. And of course, the Irish Derby winner, Zagreb. While Europeans are numerous and strong, the North American contenders are really at their best right now. Jaliccio's victory in the Arc was one for the ages. Sent off as the 9-5 favorite, Jalicio won by a whopping 5 lengths, the largest margin in 31 years. But the next stop on Jalicio's hit parade is Tokyo in the Japan Cup, which leaves the Breeders' Cup turf wide open. And set to bust down the door at Woodbine is the New York duo of Diplomatic Jet and Awad. Both took center stage 2 weeks ago in the Turf Classic at Belmont Park. Diplomatic Jet won the race, Awad just a tick behind. Both have Woodbine in their sights.
I feel excellent, I'm trying not to do anything different. I'm just trying to cover all bases that I can, and well, it's just the way things are. He's good, I'm good, and Mr. Hooper's good. Mr. and Mrs. Hooper.
You want him to run the right way. I didn't want to see him move too soon and hang the last 16th. I think coming out of the race like this, it'll make him do better mentally and physically, and basically he kind of thinks that he won. And I think he's in the right direction.
Also heading in the right direction is the likely pre-race favorite, Singspiel. Singspiel already owns a victory over the temperamental turf course at Woodbine, and the addition of Lasix has made him doubly tough.
He did race on Lasix for the first time in Toronto and came out of the race like he hadn't even run. So hopefully that little change with the Lasix will move him ahead just enough to be able to get the job done once again. I know one thing, he's had a trip over the racetrack. He handled it well, and he handled the trip well coming from Europe. So looking forward to it again.
One of the other American that bears watching in the Breeders' Cup turf is Talwa. Trained by Richard Mandela, his resume includes both Awad and Sandpit in the Caesars Palace Turf Championship.
We put him in there and he broke the track record and beat Sandpit and Awad, and as we all know, that takes a big doing. His last race in the Delmar Handicap was 6 weeks after that, and I think it maybe left him a little wilted to do that. So I've given him just a little extra time to get ready for the Breeders' Cup, and we'll see if that pays off.
One of the best training jobs to win the Breeders' Cup turf was turned in by 5-time Breeders' Cup winner Neil Drysdale, who in 1989 won this race with a horse who had never even started on the turf.
Drys, we worked and did some quite serious work on the grass with the 2 other horses I was going to run in the Breeders' Cup, which is the Political Ambition and Sabona. And he held his own with them, and they were going to run in the mile race. So we had a pretty good idea that he was going to run well, and we knew what sort of horse he was.
Prize the surging Sierra Roberto toward the inside. Bahira late run, a driving finish in the turn, and here's the wire, and it is Prize, a desperate nose.
I've seen every card there is.
Welcome back to our preview of Breeders' Cup 13, scheduled for this Saturday in Toronto. You know, the great Secretariat was known for his prowess on the dirt, but he closed out his illustrious career at Woodbine in a 1.5-mile grass race. Of course, that was a decade or so before the Breeders' Cup even came into existence.
And that was on a damp, dreary day with a soft turf course. And with the weather as wet as it's been this fall, it wouldn't be any surprise if we came up with spongy going next weekend. One more factor that plays into the hands of the Europeans. With more on the far right angle, we'll go back now to Toronto and Mike and Tom.
Well, standing here on this turf course at Woodbine, you'd think you were standing in Europe. It's just like a European turf course. And looking at the results of the Breeders' Cup Turf, you would think that the race was run in Europe. The Europeans have a tremendous record in this race.
They really do, Tom, and you got to expect them to run well again this year. Singspiel is the horse that I like from Europe. He's already been over here. He already came here and won a race over this turf course. He won the Canadian International, and he did it in impressive fashion. I like the fact that he's got that start over this turf course. I think that really makes him the one to beat.
And among the best from this continent, Diplomatic Jet.
Definitely. Diplomatic Jet was a powerhouse in the Turf Classic last time out. My question about Diplomatic Jet is, does he just like Belmont Park? If he runs that well over this course, I think he's going to be a solid contender. He reminds me a little of Northern Spur, his style of running. Northern Spur like to lay right off the pace, make that one run into the stretch, and Diplomatic Jet does the same thing. He's going to have to hold off the closers. One of those is Awad, another horse coming out of the Turf Classic. I know you raise your eyes at Awad, but he hasn't won in a long time, in over a year, but he will be running at the end, and I don't think you can leave him out of your gimmicks.
Oh, call me crazy. I just like to bet on horses that win.
Well, Awad deserves all the attention that he's going to get on Saturday, even though he hasn't been to the winner's circle since 1995 when he won the Arlington Million. But Charlsie, he really seems like he's rounding into form right now.
Well, you know, he hasn't been running badly at any point this year. He's just been very unlucky. He comes from off the pace. He needs some pace up in front of him, and he needs a little bit of clear sailing traffic-wise. And if he gets all of that, don't be surprised if he puts it all together next weekend to repel the European invaders.
And about those Europeans, no winner of the Arc de Triomphe has ever won the Breeders' Cup Turf. But horses who ran and didn't win in the Arc have been in the money 10 times in the Breeders' Cup Turf. And that is something for you to remember as you get set to buy your Exacta and Trifecta tickets.
Well, you know, obviously the Europeans have got a long way to come to get to the starting gate for the Breeders' Cup Turf. But there's one horse in this field who only has to make a very short walk from the stable area, and that's the 3-year-old Canadian Chief Bearheart. This colt not only lives at Woodbine, he loves it at Woodbine. He's never been worse than second in his last 3 starts over his home course. So he's one to watch, too.
And to show you how deep this field is, one of the long shots is likely to be Secretariat Stakes winner Marlin from the stable of D. Wayne Lucas. Now remember that Lucas has won 12 Breeders' Cup races, but he's never won this race, the Turf, or the Classic. Oh, and speaking of the Classic, jockey Jerry Bailey has really dominated this race in the 90s. He's won the Breeders' Cup Classic 4 of the last 5 years. So it wasn't easy for Jerry to pick out his favorite.
Of all the Breeders' Cup Classics, last year's Breeders' Cup, it was the end of the perfect season, and it was Cigar, and it was home here at Belmont Park. It was 3 in a row. I think that would probably have to be the most special.
And here he is, the unconquerable, invincible, unbeatable Cigar!
Feel the power of the NFL by where
Cigar does win at Woodbine, he'll have to get up off the mat to do it. You see, 2 weeks ago, the sport's younger super horse, Skip Away, beat Cigar to the wire in the Jockey Club Gold Cup.
Might pull it off. Here comes Cigar. Cigar wanders to the outside. Skip Away. Here's the finish, and it is. I believe Skip Away got it.
For all he knew, he probably won this race. I mean, he finished close enough, I think, to where he felt he ran a good race. I think he ran a good race. You know, obviously the horse that beat him, Skip Away, ran a good race, and we're not, personally, I'm not really discouraged about anything.
But it does appear that Cigar's jockey, Jerry Bailey, was discouraged. Bailey blamed himself for Cigar's loss to Dare & Go in the Pacific Classic. In the Woodward, Bailey rode Cigar like he always did, and the champ won easily. But the Gold Cup was different. Bailey has decided it's time to become Cigar's jockey and not just his passenger.
I think now, seeing that maybe he's got a few more miles on him, I need to help him out a little bit. Heck, he carried me around there for 16, 17 races. I think it's my turn to help him out a little bit. And I think I ride better like that, knowing that maybe he's not as overpowering, and I'll take my best shot with him and look for an edge in the race.
So now Cigar will board one more plane, travel to one more foreign land, and run in one more big race. One more chapter in a storybook career. One more chance to burn bright.
3 in a row is nice, 4 in a row would be even nicer, but I think the most important thing for me is for Cigar to go out on a winning note. I mean, I don't think there's anything more important to me than having him go out a winner, because that's what he's been his entire life, and I want people to remember him as such.
And I think it would be a big feather in his cap to win the Classic twice, and of course, as you know, I guess, you know, Niesk won 2 Breeders' Cup miles, but it'd sure be nice to win 2 Breeders' Cup Classics.
It's been a great 2 years, but in order to win 16 of his last 18 starts, Cigar has really had to overcome a lot, Charlsie.
And on Thursday, he had another obstacle thrown in his path. He suffered the 3rd recurrence of the quarter crack that's plagued him throughout the year. Now, trainer Bill Mott does not seem overly concerned about this. He says on a scale of 1 to 5, it's only a 1. So they put another fiberglass patch on the foot on Tuesday. He breezed an easy 3/4 of a mile on Thursday morning and appears to be right on schedule for the Classic. But still, this is not the kind of thing you want to have happen when you're preparing for a race as momentous as the Breeders' Cup. And it also lends the question, it makes you wonder if could this have been incubating a little bit and been part of the problem in the stretch in his last start in the Jockey Club. But either way, I guess we can say he's all patched up and he's ready to go again.
Well, Cigar is now 6 years old, and should he win this Saturday, he'd be the oldest ever to take a Breeders' Cup Classic. And speaking of age, here's a Breeders' Cup trivia question for you to ponder. Who was the youngest and who was the oldest trainer to win a Breeders' Cup race? We'll be back with the answer after this.
Championship race. He was 74 when he won the 1987 Classic with Ferdinand, and then broke his own record 2 years later at the age of 76 with Sunday Silence in the 89 Classic.
Well, this year's Classic, the pot has been sweetened. The purse, $4 million. It's contested at the Classic 1 1/4 distance on the main track.
14 horses pre-entered for the Classic with a bit of international flavor. 1 European, 1 Japanese, and 1 Canadian entry. Cigar, the obvious center of attention, but a big West Coast push headed up by Darren Go, the first horse to prove that Cigar is not invincible. And now others are thinking along the same lines.
Cigar looked a little soft the other day in getting beat, of course. He's had a long campaign, and it just looks like it's possibly the right time to go after him.
Jim Bond is like everybody else running in the Breeders' Cup Classic this year. With Cigar no longer invincible, opportunity knocks. And the $4 million purse isn't a bad reason to run either. Heading into the Classic, the obvious now horse was Skip-Away. With his victory in the Jockey Club Gold Cup 2 weeks ago at Belmont Park, we may have witnessed the passing of the torch to a new generation of stars. But now Carolyn and Sonny Hine will have to settle for just the 3-year-old championship. Skip-Away will skip the Classic and rest up for 1997. Skip-Away wasn't the only horse to beat Cigar this year. Darren Go won the Pacific Classic and in the process ended the champ's record-tying streak of 16 straight wins. The Richard Mandela trainee is back to prove the Pacific Classic was no fluke.
Any way you analyze it, he ran a heck of a race. You know, granted there was a fast pace and all of that, but he had to come up with quite a race to come 1 1/4 miles and 59 and change. And anytime you beat Cigar, you've really done something.
2 battle-tested warriors from the Triple Crown Series are still going strong. Louis Quatorze ran a clunker in the Molson Million a few weeks back. He hopes for better over the Woodbine track next weekend. Editor's Note, meantime, is fresh off a big win in the Super Derby, and Wayne Lucas believes he'll be a legitimate threat with the right luck.
I think he could be a little bit overlooked. It's going to be difficult to win that race, but I think if you handicap it and look at it realistically, things happen. Strange things happen at Woodbine. That track fools a few of them.
Over the years, you've had horses like AP Indy, Fly So Free, you know, champions. Didn't run any good on it. So I think what you have to do is get there early, get a work or two into them, and try to get them used to it, and hopefully it'll be a different story this time.
The common thread that all the Classic contenders share is that at one time during the year, they were the now horse. The same goes for Will's Way. In the Travers, he beat Skip-Away, Louis Quatorze, and Editor's Note. Will's Way is healthy again, and Jim Bond is hoping to relive his Midsummer Night's Dream one more time.
They've been telling everybody how good this horse was, but, you know, you got to prove it in this game. And this colt went on and did a great job, and, you know, he's a real McCoy. He beat the best 3-year-olds they had, and, you know, hopefully he's going to go on to the Breeders' Cup and show them some more.
Will's Way, one of the first horses to ship into Woodbine to prepare for the Classic. He's been there over a week already. Some early shippers hoping to get an early look at the layout are Mike and Tom.
23 years ago here at Woodbine, a legend came. His name was Secretariat, and he closed out his career here. And on Saturday, October 26th, another legend returns to Woodbine. Cigar, he is the focus of the Breeders' Cup Classic.
Well, definitely the focus, and with Skip Away not going, Cigar will be odds on to win the Classic. I think the main question might be, is he as good as he was last year, and will he handle the track here at Woodbine?
Will he handle the track is a major question, especially when you want to take a short price. There have been fantastic horses here like Fly So Free, AP Indy, that have come to this track and run absolutely bewilderingly bad races.
Well, I think you're going to really have to look at what he does prior to the race when he comes in here and works. If he works well over the track, I think he'll run well over it.
Skip Away, a classic example, came to the track, was here 8 days before his victory in the Woodbine Million. That's key.
Yeah, I really think it is. And a horse that you know likes the track, that you're going to get a price on probably, is Dramatic Gold. He won the Molson Million here 2 years ago in '94. He's coming off a big win in the Meadowlands Cup. He's getting good right now. Another horse you might want to look at is Atticus, and I know that his race at Turfway was really helped by a speed favoring track that day, but he might get loose on the front end. We've already seen Louis Quatorze not run well over this track. If he doesn't press Atticus early, maybe nobody will, and if he gets loose on the front end, he's a dangerous horse.
Well, speed is always dangerous, but the most dangerous of them all is a horse that won 16 races in a row.
But Cigar doesn't have a race over this track. Is that important, Charlsie?
Well, Cigar's in a league by himself. He doesn't exactly have to carry his racetrack around with him. But for the average horse, any horse with experience over this track is going to have a little bit of an edge. Whether it's a race or just a series of workouts, it's going to be beneficial in what will be a very tight race.
You know, there's one horse in this Classic with very deep ties to the Breeders' Cup and to Woodbine. As Mike pointed out, Dramatic Gold won the 1994 Molson Million on the Woodbine track. And then he finished third to Concern later that fall in the Breeders' Cup Classic at Churchill Downs. Dramatic Gold skipped the Breeders' Cup in 1995, but take a look at his warm-up for the Breeders' Cup this year. Early October, New Jersey at the Meadowlands, in the Meadowlands Cup. 3 out from the rail, it's Dramatic Gold. On the far outside, Formal Gold. Mount Sassafras at the rail. And in a brilliant performance, Dramatic Gold pulls away from Formal Gold and Mount Sassafras, and the top 3 finishers all go to the Classic this year.
And remember that Dramatic Gold is no stranger to facing Cigar. He did himself proud by finishing second to the champ in July's Citation Challenge at Arlington. He's had a big year already, Dave.
One thing's for sure. This year's Classic will definitely be a race to remember. And as you think back over the other Breeders' Cup Classics, who could forget that stretch drive at Hollywood Park between 2 Kentucky Derby winners, Ferdinand and Ali Sheba?
I waited as long as I thought I could at the 16th pole and let him go, and he opened up a little bit and threw his ears up. And here come Ali Sheba, and I said to myself, oh, damn, I moved too soon. I'm going to get beat. And I kept shaking the stick at him, and the wire came up just in time because one more jump and Ali Sheba is going to be the winner.
Well, one of the most popular things about Breeders' Cup Afternoon is the $1 Breeders' Cup Pick 7. And last year, there were 88 lucky fans who cashed in big. That was a huge payoff of $22,000 in the 1995 Breeders' Cup Pick 7, considering that there were 3 favorites, including a 5-2 shot Ridgewood Pearl and 2 odds-on favorites, Inside Information and Cigar. Now, in 1994, nobody hit all 7. 6 of 7 winners paid $66 grand, In 1993, when our Kong won the Classic, the payoff was a bonanza, $1.5 million. And in the first 2 years of the Breeders' Cup Pick 7, big payoffs there, too.
Well, everybody could use a little help from an expert when it comes to playing the Breeders' Cup Pick 7. And before he went into management, Stephen Christ was a very successful and well-known student of the Pick 6. So we asked Stephen to give us his thoughts on the Pick 7.
Well, you know, you can't just use 3 or 4 horses a race because it'll cost you $5,000 or $10,000. You've got to take a couple of stands and single a couple of horses and turn this into a pick 4 or a pick 5. You can't just use your top selections in every race. It costs too much money and it doesn't give you the flexibility to reach deeper into a tougher race. There are some new challenges this year. One is the fact that it's being held in Canada at a track where a lot of good American horses have inexplicably run poorly in the past. So that's just another X factor you have to worry about. Also, we're going to have a lot of Europeans over here for the grass races, and they're very tough to handicap. You really have to look at patterns, and you look at trainers perhaps more than you do with American horses, because there's not that much correlation between how well they run over there and how well they run over here.
Well, I may not hit the Pick 7, but I'm willing to bet I can stump you with this final trivia question. Who are the 6 stallions who have each sired the most Breeders' Cup winners? They're tied at 3 apiece. Think on that as we take our last break.
Well, Mike, we've given a general overview of the Breeders' Cup card. How about a helpful handicapping hint on the card?
Yeah, Tom, I think you have to watch the workouts. I think you really need to watch and see which horses come in here early and work well over this track in the morning. I think the horses that work well here will run well here on Breeders' Cup Day.
A classic example of that was Skipaway, who shipped here 8 days before the Woodbine Million. Yeah. He got the money. Louis Quatorze, who showed up right before the race, got nothing.
Right.
What's your best bet on Breeders' Cup Day?
Well, yeah, I kind of am looking forward to getting a price on Serena's Song. Here's a horse that you don't usually get a price on. She loves to go to the front. Woodbine's a speed-favoring racetrack, and I think I might make her my best bet.
My best bet is going to be a horse that's going to be a bit of a price. Minister's Melody in the Juvenile for fillies. She closed against the speed bias at Turfway Park that afternoon, and I think she'll do very well on Breeders' Cup Day. Your favorite race, Breeders' Cup Day?
I guess I'm looking forward to the Classic. I want to see if Cigar can reestablish himself. Everybody was stunned when he was beaten by Skipaway, and I think that we want to see the real Cigar, and I'd like to see a big race out of him in the Classic, so I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, my favorite race, especially betting-wise, would have to be the Distaff. You'll see fillies and mares that were even money in Grade 1 races go off in the Breeders' Cup Distaff at 3, 4, maybe 5 to 1. Great betting race.
Yeah. And one last piece of advice?
One last piece of advice? Well, if you are coming here to Canada, bring a sweater.
And what are you looking forward to most on Saturday?
Well, I think like everybody else in the world, Dave, I'm looking forward to seeing how Cigar closes out his racing career. But I'm also particularly interested in this phenomenon of the fillies tackling the colts. Always fascinating to me to watch the girls try the boys. And we've got a good group of them. I mean, Japosa Springs and Capote Bell are going to make the sprint very interesting. We've got Windsharp in the turf. We've got Memories of Silver in the mile. But most of all, we've got the 3-year-old filly Yanks Music taking on the colts in the Breeders' Cup Classic.
And if I had to bet right now, I think that Yanks Music will tackle Cigar. As a matter of fact, in London, Ladbrokes has Yanks Music as the second choice in the wagering behind Cigar.
Now, what are you looking forward to seeing?
The turf races are very interesting. I think the Europeans will do very well, but I'm about ready for a colt to explode in the Juvenile and then give us something to yell about next year in the Triple Crown.
But sometimes we get something to cry about in the Breeders' Cup because a lot of the horses, that's their final start. And certainly there will not be a dry eye in the house, a lot of emotion when Cigar closes out his career.
Well, our party continues because on Wednesday, we're going to have complete coverage of the post-position draw. From Canada, 4 o'clock Eastern Time for an hour. We'll bring you up to speed on what's happening, and with the big fields, it's going to be very crucial to your handicapping. So keep joining us right here on ESPN as we race to the Breeders' Cup. This has been a presentation of ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports.